Well, the championship season is now in full flow and we are back this weekend for another full fixture list as it is match day 3 score predictions. Of course, I'll be giving you my predictions for all 12 matches, encouraging you to give us your scores in the comments as well. And as you did in your numbers last weekend, many of you, like me, were stumped by some very surprising results and scorelines. So it was a very low scoring week. Let's have a quick look back at what we all said last weekend. I only got 4 points in the end, which was a stark contrast from my brilliant opening weekend. A few points lost late on as well, both Norwich losing their win in stoppage time and Leeds losing their draw. Both cost me another 2 points, which would have put me a bit further up the ladder. But let's reflect on the stars of the show from last weekend, because 5 of you managed a better score than me, which I think shows how bad that weekend was to predict, because so many of you played along and only 5 beat me. Nobody in double figures and nobody with more than 1 perfect score. Firstly, the leader of the pack though, Darren Goodwin, well done to you. Leicester City was your perfect score. 3 points out of your 8 in total. You win the match day with that score. Owen Coe, who won on match day 1, got 7. Good effort from him. And then we've got Mania on 6, all from correct outcomes, which was the most of anyone on that match day. W&G, Mitchell and Aksha, who all got 5. W&G getting the perfect score on Preston, which Owen did as well. But let's move on to match day 3, where hopefully we'll all do a little bit better than that. And we start with some Friday night football, and one that I've got to be honest, I have changed my mind on 2 or 3 times already. It is at Ellen Road, and it is Leeds United versus West Bromwich Albion. Now, this is the first video I'm recording since I watched Leeds in the Carabao Cup live, and you could sort of see some of the imprints of what Farke's trying to do. But it is a bit of a concern that they're so leaky defensively. Of course, Joe Rodon has come in now and there's a couple returning from injury which may help with that. But Leeds are still losing more players than we expected to see. Jack Harrison now moved on to Everton. Nonto obviously on strike as it stands. There's been a lot more change and upheaval at Leeds as a result than I think a lot of us probably expected after the way they went down and some of the performances. Against Birmingham, it was a pretty difficult day if we're being honest. They didn't play well. They didn't create a lot despite keeping the ball. And yes, it was only a penalty late on that separated the two sides, and probably a draw could have been a fair result. But Leeds didn't do enough to win the game, which at this level, if they want a promotion, is something that's going to have to happen. For West Brom, a very narrow victory against Swansea. However, defensively still not looking great, which we don't expect from a Corberan side. Didn't create a great deal of chances, and Swansea arguably had more of the clear-cut ones. But it was a decent game for the neutral. It was relatively entertaining, but defensively there's still those cracks. And to be 3-0 up with 25 to go, you would not expect a grandstand finish, and you can't afford to have them too often. So it does leave me in a state where I feel that both sides are a long way from their best, and probably a little way off what we're going to see them looking like at the end of the transfer window. And as a result of that, I have to apologise, because I'm going to sit on the fence with a Championship's favourite scoreline to start. I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. We know last season those Friday night games traditionally weren't very exciting. So I'm going to sit on the fence and I'm going to go lower scoring than I might have otherwise. I'm going to go for 1-1 to start us off this weekend. As we move on to Saturday lunchtime now, we've got a big game down south. It is Plymouth Argyle versus Southampton in a 12:30 kickoff. And both sides had very different draws last weekend. Plymouth went and got a decent point away at Watford after 2 wins at the start of the season in League and Cup. And to be fair, after some of the perhaps defensive frailties they showed against Huddersfield, playing out from the back and almost getting caught a couple of times, this was very much a good away performance from Plymouth against a side that had done well on the opening day. They still had a threat on the counter, they still created a few chances, but they were happy to concede possession, they were happy to give up opportunities. And while we saw Plymouth playing in a far more expansive way at home, on the road there, they were happy to sit back at times. And in the end, they could have nicked it if they'd taken a chance or two. For Southampton, I go back to what me and Craig said in the pre-season predictions. The big worry is Russell Martin's style always leaks goals. They had one of the worst records at Swansea in the Championship defensively last year. He's come into a Southampton side which didn't have the strongest Premier League defence, and the frailty showed again. A couple of individual errors, some poor marking from set pieces. And yes, the attacking threat is great. Armstrong and Adams, we know they're going to score goals in a Championship. But you cannot score 4 goals and not win a game. Yes, for Norwich, the same can be said, but for Southampton, you're the favourites. You're the side that have come down and are expected to win the game. They had loads of the ball, they had loads of shots, and the stats might fool you by thinking, oh yeah, but they had 30 shots and 70% of the ball. But Norwich had more of the up to clear-cut chances. Norwich probably should have won the game. And to be fair, Southampton in the 97th minute, yes, they got a penalty, they took it. But there wasn't enough to convince me yet again that defensively they're going to be solid enough. So away to Plymouth, I think it's going to be a tricky game. Plymouth are going to come at them and be aggressive. Southampton are going to try and keep the ball. We know that under Russell Martin. The question is, are they going to be able to break through on the counter more? Or are Plymouth going to be able to put pressure on them and force mistakes? Well, I kind of think both's going to happen. And that's why I'm going to sit on the fence again. But I've got a feeling this game might be a thriller. So you might get a 1-0 away win here. But I'm going to go for 2 goals apiece. I think there's going to be goals. I think there's going to be defensive errors. And I think either side could nick it by 1. But I'm not sure which. So I'm sitting on the fence again. I won't sit on the fence for the third game of the day though. Because the 3 o'clock start with Blackburn Rovers versus Hull City. Blackburn came back from 2-0 down against 10-man Rotherham. They got themselves a late point, and you have to give credit to Sammy Schmodix after missing a penalty to come back and get a second half brace, albeit after a unique red card, I think you'd say. Silly from Fred Onyedinma, but it gave Blackburn a chance and they took it. So a crucial point on the road for them, and they didn't have to wait 28 games for a draw this season. For Hull, Osan Tufan, star of the show. A hat-trick for him, added to by Aaron Connolly as well. Was a really decent performance, was aggressive, was front-footed. They were by far the better side. They kept the ball well. And while they didn't create many clear-cut chances, they were ruthless. They've got individual quality in that team. And I think this is what we're going to have to see Hull try and do this season, which is adapt that style. They had that solid base from Liam Rosenior last year, albeit they've not shown it much at the start of this season. And going forward now, it's whether they can go to that next level. So I'm not going to get overexcited about the performance, but it was a good one and it was a good win. It was against the side many of us expect to be down there, but you've got to win the game, and that's exactly what they did. My worry is that Blackburn are normally far better at home. Hull struggled a bit on away from home against Norwich, and they were far more cautious on the road last season than they were at home. So I do think Blackburn have got a chance to nick this one, and I'm actually going to go for the same score that both of these sides had on the opening day. I'm going to go for Blackburn to win by 2-1, just from what we've seen this year in their respective home and away game, and based a little bit on last season too. Blackburn to win by 2-1, and John Dale Thomason still doing a good job. Let's move on to a game that may not be quite as entertaining. It's at Ashton Gate, and it is Bristol City versus Birmingham City. Both sides picked up a 1-0 victory late on last weekend. We mentioned Birmingham's stoppage time penalty against Leeds. Well, what about Matty James in the 94th minute at Millwall? The famous Harry Cornick long throw for me as a Luton fan. Flicked on and Matty James gets it in. It was a very good result. Not many teams win at Millwall. And for Bristol City, after a draw at home to Preston, it's not a bad start to the season at all. You have to say the same for both of these sides. Threw in the cup, avoided the banana skin, and 4 points out of 6. It really has been promising so far. What we have seen traditionally, though, is that Birmingham, away from home, again set up far more cautiously, a bit like we said with Hull in the last game. If you look at the Swansea game, they relied on Swansea making a stupid error playing out from the back. And Birmingham City against Bristol City, are they going to get that? I'm not too sure. Bristol City have their moments defensively, but they've started this season pretty well. So I'm going to keep my faith in them this time. I'm going to predict them to win the game. I don't think this is going to be a thriller. I'm going for Bristol City to win it by 1-0. Let's move on to a game which sees a lot of attacking quality. It is Leicester City versus Cardiff City. Cardiff have been goals galore at both ends really, haven't they? A 2-2 on the opening day at Leeds, a 2-2 in the cup against Colchester, and then a surprise 2-1 defeat at home to QPR last weekend. Went 2 down, sort of got hit on the counter by sucker punches. And if we're being brutally honest about it, they did have enough chances to win the game. They created a bit. But the area we think they strengthen most in the summer is the one that they seem to struggle with on the day. Not taking chances costs them. And in the end, if you defend like that, you're going to get caught out. For the other side of things, Leicester, well, it was a good championship away win. They've not maybe got that creative spark. It was our big worry in pre-season. We talked about the loss of Barnes and of Maddison and of Tielemans for that creative force. But Mavididi is coming to the party. We didn't know if he was going to be ready for the first day. Well, he's certainly in form for the second. A big match winner for him. A very good performance against, again, a pretty poor Huddersfield side, but still gave up a couple of good chances, and that's something they're going to have to eradicate. So 2 wins out of 2, you have to say well done, but they've not been the most convincing performances yet, so very hard to judge where Leicester are. But based on Cardiff's defensive record so far this year, I just can't see anything other than a home win. I still think Cardiff are going to be in trouble. I know I got stick for saying it pre-season, but for me, this is a comprehensive home win. I think Leicester might win by 2 this time. I'm going to go by 3-1. Let's move on to 2 sides that have started the season with successive defeats. It is Middlesbrough versus Huddersfield. Of course, these two did play in the Carabao Cup a week and a half or so ago. Huddersfield losing out 3-2 on that occasion. But Middlesbrough have been very unconvincing, and if we're being honest, Coventry made them look very poor, just as they did in the Championship playoff semi-final. I know they beat Huddersfield in that cup tie a week or so ago, but considering that Huddersfield went down to 10 early on, it wasn't a brilliant display and they still gave them a chance. For Huddersfield, defeat at Leicester and Plymouth. I mean, the Leicester one, they're not going to lose too much sleep over. Leicester, one of the strongest sides in the league, but they did have a couple of chances to nick a point, and that can't be said for Middlesbrough away at Coventry, who just played them off the park in spells. It was a very disappointing display. I think it's 7 without a win now in the Championship for them, and only a couple of shots on target. Yes, they probably should have taken one of them, but defensively they just weren't good enough. We know a couple of players have come in this week. They're getting stronger by the time, and we thought it was going to be a slightly slow start as they rebuilt their squad and replaced some of the lone stars from last year, but it's going to have to pick up pretty quickly. Is it going to be in this game? Everything would suggest that Middlesbrough will win this, but I just got a feeling that Huddersfield might get the first goal as they did in the cup tie. And if they can keep 11 on the pitch, then they might be able to get something out of the game. They score the first goal. We know the Riverside, it's going to get a little bit nervy. It's not been the best start. They've not yet scored a league goal. I do think they will on this occasion, but I'm going to go for Huddersfield to score first and to nick a point. And it's my second Championship's favourite scoreline. I'm going for 1-1. Let's move on to QPR versus Ipswich Town, 2 teams that will be very happy with their last weekend results. QPR got an away win at Cardiff, which, based on what a lot of people have predicted this year, is going to be a relegation 6-pointer. Was almost a perfect away performance. Gave up a couple of chances, which on another day might have been taken, but you can see the difference it made having an actual centre-half in. Steve Cook brings tons of experience, and if they get those guys settled in and up to speed, which we've got to accept, a lot of them aren't yet. Jack Colback is getting up towards fitness, and there's a couple of other players getting settled in. Begovic, of course, skippering the side now too at the weekend. So there are experienced players coming up to speed, and I think QPR will be fine once they get settled. This game, though, is probably a bit of a nightmare for them. A side that are going to press high, press relentlessly, and Ipswich, while away at Sunderland, there were moments it could have slipped away in that first half. At home, they looked absolutely imperious against Stoke. Stoke had started the season on fire, and yes, they're one of the most unpredictable teams in the Championship, but Ipswich were phenomenal. The only criticism, really, is that they didn't turn their chances into brilliant ones, and they didn't score more than 2. They didn't have lots of the ball, they were happy to let Stoke have it, and they pressed at the right moments. It was a very good game plan. Kieran McKenna, we've never doubted his ability as a coach. The big question is, can they do that away from home consistently this season? We banked on their home form, getting them comfortably into the middle of the table. They can keep an away run going, then the playoff push might not be far away. I'm going to go for Ipswich to nick this because I just think the styles clash. And I feel like QPR, with a lot of the players signing later and not up to speed, it's maybe not going to be their day against them. So Ipswich just have too much energy. And I'm going to go for 2-1 for the visitors. Let's move up to the north for the next one, and we start with another side who have lost both of their opening games. It is Sheffield Wednesday versus Preston North End. Preston on 4 points out of 6. It was a good win against Sunderland, and to be fair, they are looking pretty strong at the minute. They scored from both of their shots on target, so you've got to give them credit there. But it wasn't the best display in the world. Defensively, we know they're pretty solid. We saw it at the start of last season, but they gave up the ball. Maybe not a bad ploy against Sunderland away from home, who like to play on the counter, and they were ruthless with their chances, which is something they weren't doing at the start of last season. For Sheffield Wednesday away at Hull, just too open. And yes, Hull had a player in the form of his life in Tufan, but you cannot give up 70% of the ball, and then so many chances. If you're going to give up the ball, you've got to then be compact and prevent shots on goal from within the box. And Sheffield Wednesday just didn't do that. Yes, they had a couple of chances of their own. They scored both of their shots on target, but the second was a consolation. And if they play like that for most of this year, which surprised me from a Cisco team, which is normally defensively solid, then Sheffield Wednesday are going to be in the big trouble that both me and Craig predicted. They've got to sort things out soon. Of course, they're still building that squad. Their transfer window was delayed because of the manager upheaval and whatever. And it's probably going to take 4 to 6 weeks before we see the best of them. As a result of that, I have gone for a Preston win this weekend. I just feel they're closer to being up to speed. They've got less turnover in the squad. They're not still hugely building their squad. And I think, although they've not got the biggest goal threat in the world, they're going to go and nick a 1-0 away win here, which, as many say, is the best away win you can get. Let's move on to the two teams that were probably the stars of matchday 1, but both had disappointing results last weekend. It is Stoke versus Watford. Watford, to be fair to them, let me get the bias out the way now. They were pretty entertaining to watch. They are certainly showing that they've got a clear game plan, which is something that we haven't seen from them for a while. However, that ruthless edge they showed against QPR, well, against Stevenage in the Cup and against Plymouth, it has, I'm afraid, been lost. Plymouth, in the end, just sat back. They played in a shape, could have hit them on the counter once or twice, and Watford weren't able to take chances. And yes, they had 21 shots on goal. Only 3 of them hit the target. Only one of them was a great chance. They didn't create enough or open Plymouth up enough times. But good to watch, good progress, and signs Valérien Ismaël is getting it right. And of course, they still had a goal to celebrate at the weekend because they seem to be very worried about events at Brighton. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. Let's go to Stoke, though, who lost 2-0 at Ipswich. And after a brilliant performance at home to a poor Rotherham side, well, they were the poor away side at Ipswich. They got played off the park. They got outfought. They got outfought. And they just didn't have enough energy to deal with Ipswich pressing. In the end, it arguably could have been more. Yes, maybe Stoke could have nicked one on the counter, but Stoke had a lot of the ball. They've got a young side. They're making big progressions, and they've had a huge churn of players this summer. It's going to take a little bit of time, and they will be better at home first. And that's what makes this game pretty tricky. We've seen before, and this is hard because Watford haven't played an away game yet this year, so we don't know what to expect from them. They've looked very good at home, very defensively solid. But what happens when you're playing against a side who are at home, who are pressing high, who are pushing their wingers up high? I just don't know. I've got a feeling that if Watford let in the first goal, it could go wrong because we've seen it before. I genuinely wouldn't be shocked if this was 3 or 4-1 either way. I wouldn't be shocked if it was 0-0. As it is, I'm going to go for Stoke to win purely because their last home performance was terrific. They were good at home to West Brom in the Cup as well. And Watford away, all I've got to go on is the Stevenage game in the end of last season. So I hope you can forgive me, Watford fans, but I'm going for Stoke to win by 3-1. Again, I wouldn't be shocked if I was wrong on this one, but there's not a lot to base it on with Watford not playing an away game. So Stoke, based on their first home performance, I'll go for them to win this one. Let's move on to Sunderland versus Rotherham, two sides that have started the season pretty poorly. For Sunderland, it's back-to-back 2-1 defeats against Ipswich and Preston last weekend. Just not quite there at the moment. It's a bit disjointed. There's not enough depth and they haven't replaced some of the quality they lost in the summer. I think a few Sunderland fans are a little bit worried and they're going to need a big finish to the window. But for Tony Mowbray, I mean, it is a little bit unfair after the job he did. There was talk initially in the summer, wasn't there, about him moving on. And I just worry that there's going to be 3 or 4 more signings needed. And then, can he get them up to speed after the international break? I still don't think we see the best of Sunderland until after it. For Rotherham, a decent result against Blackburn. It obviously could have been a completely different game on a number of occasions. Firstly, if Blackburn had scored the early penalty, probably would have gone on to win it. The man who missed the penalty, Sammy Schmodics, then was at fault for their opener. Fred Onyedinma scored a brilliant second goal and then got sent off in the most bizarre and stupid fashion possible. And that obviously offered Blackburn a lifeline that in the end got them the point. We saw it last season under Matt Taylor. There were 3 or 4 outstanding home displays. And Rotherham, they're going to have to rely on their home form this year because the performance away at Stoke was dismal. I don't expect them to be a big threat away from home against most sides in the division. And that's why for this occasion, I think Sunderland will get their first win of the year. I'm going to go for them to win 2-0 at home to Rotherham. I just don't see where the big threat is. And in Fred, they've lost a lot of their mobility as well. So it is a worry for me. You've got to bear in mind they've lost a player in both of their first 2 games as well. Can they go a 90 minutes without a red card, Rotherham? That's going to be a big decision too. I mean, between them, they've got 3 red cards in 4 games. So I think there might be a little bit of action here for the referee. I'm going to go for a Sunderland 2-0 win, but that's purely based on Rotherham's opening day and the end of last season, where they weren't great away from home. Let's move on to the final game on Saturday. It is Swansea City versus Coventry City. Both sides very good going forward last weekend. Only one of them was good at the back. And for Coventry, I consider this a good start to the season. They played really well against Leicester. They had a good game plan away from home. It was only Kieran Dewsbury Hall's magic that changed it, and the subs they had to make later on. I was then worried in the week when Gustavo Hamer was linked with moving on. I did say in the predictions, if he went, I wouldn't be as sure about my playoff pick, but what a performance. A 3-0 victory. Yes, Middlesbrough not quite up to speed yet, but Matty Godden in the goals, Haji Wright looking a very good signing. And they just had a constant threat, which, yes, they gave up a couple of chances at the back. We're going to have to wait a while for that to get settled for a lot of teams. But going forward, Coventry looked great, and I've got to say that I was really impressed with them. On the flip side of that, Swansea. I don't know what's going on. Russell Martin has left the building, but his defensive style has not. It's going to be something Michael Duff's got to address because they can't keep leaking goals like this. Yes, they show great spirit at 3-0 down, but it's easy to play when there's no pressure and the game's over. They've got to avoid getting into that position. An element of misfortune at times, of course. You've got the own goal, you've got the penalty, whatever, but you can't give away 3 shots on target, 3 goals, and you've got to be ruthless too. For me, Swansea's defensive record is still going to hold them back. It was one of the worst in the Championship last year. I wouldn't be shocked if it's one of the worst this year. And although they lost on the opening day away from home, I'm going to go for Coventry to nick it because we saw in that Birmingham game that Swansea got caught playing out from the back. Now, Coventry play with a front 2. They push, they're aggressive, they've got a high line. I can just see them catching them out once or twice. So I'm going to go for Coventry to nick it by 2-1. If Swansea were defending well, I might have gone for 1-1. I just feel there's going to be a mistake in there. You have to base it on what you've seen in recent weeks. And the final game is on Sunday, and it is between Norwich City and Millwall. 12 o'clock kickoff on TV. Norwich had that bonkers game at Southampton last week where they'll be gutted they didn't get the victory. I predicted that narrow win and I lost it in the 97th minute. But it won't be as upset as Millwall, who did really well to win 1-0 at Borough on the opening day. Weren't great against Bristol City last weekend, but were on course for a point. And then you say 4 points out of 6, decent start, 2 clean sheets. They're then letting their only shot on target in the 94th minute. And for Millwall, the way Gary Rowett sets up, what they pride themselves on, to get done by a long throw and a flick on, oh, it will be giving him nightmares, I'm sure about that. Millwall, the simple fact is, have not been creative enough going forward yet. That has got to change. And Norwich, on the flip side of that, have got to get better defensively because their performance there was pretty dismal. Some of the goals they gave away to Southampton were poor. Defensively, they looked all over the place, but they've got a big goal threat, and we know David Wagner's side is always going to be good going forwards. It was a worry for a lot of fans when Timu Pukki left, but Josh Sargent has clearly shown he's going to step up. There's 2 or 3 others. Fastenhout we highlighted in the pre-season preview. He's looked really good early doors as well. So positive signs. I think Norwich, despite the defensive performance last time out, are in a better position overall than Millwall. And as a result of that, I'm going to go for a 2-0 win for the hosts. But Millwall, they always bring a surprise occasionally. So don't be shocked if they end up with a 1-0 away win. So let's have a quick recap of what I've gone for on match day 3. And the big standout results, well, I've gone for both Leicester and Stoke to score 3 at home, the 2 biggest scorers of this weekend. I've also gone for Sunderland to get their first win of the season, a few away wins in there as well. And perhaps rather stupidly, I've only gone for 2 Championship's favourite scorelines, so we'll see if that catches us out this weekend. But those are just my predictions for match day 3. Do you agree or disagree with them? Let me know in the comments down below. Give us your score predictions for this match day, and as always, if you beat my score, you will get a shout out at the start of the next episode. If you did enjoy this one though, please do put a thumbs up on it. Subscribe for regular content from the Honest Football Podcast. Loads of the playlists up in the eye above, and a shout out to HelloFresh who have supported the channel all through August. You can find a link in the description to the discount there. But thank you very much for watching. Let's hope this weekend's championship is a little more predictable than the last. And hopefully we'll have some higher point scores when we return for our recap in match day 4.